Welcome back to Cities in Motion. I'm Jacob, the podcast for anyone who wants cities built for people. Each week, we dig into the systems, design, and culture that shape urban life and explore how smarter transportation, better planning, and thoughtful policy can make our communities more livable. Today, I'm joined by John Simmerman, the creator of Active Towns. John is a longtime advocate for active mobility and community health. And through his podcast, videos, and writing, he's traveled across the world highlighting places that are designing streets and public spaces that truly support people walking, biking, and living active lives. In this conversation, we talk about John's journey from corporate health promotion into storytelling and advocacy, what makes a town genuinely active, how culture and infrastructure work together, and what gives him hope as more communities begin rethinking how their streets and neighborhoods function. Let's get started.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is John Simmerman. I am a public health professional with 35 years of experience, turned YouTuber and podcaster within the last 5 years or so. And I'm currently living in my new home here in Kailua Kona, Hawaii, which is a return visit to the Big Island for me. I was here about a decade ago when I moved to Austin, Texas for a while. And I'm sure we'll get to some of the additional details from that, but that's a real quick overview of who I am.
Awesome. Great. So, what first led you to shift your career from corporate health promotion into documenting and advocating for active towns and active mobility?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. It sort of dates back about 2 decades ago to a shift that I made when I moved from Boulder, Colorado to Honolulu, Hawaii. And up until that time, the first 15 years of my career, yes, you're correct, area of emphasis was in corporate health and health promotion and disease prevention. I worked with primarily Fortune 500 companies, IBM, Motorola, Seagate Technologies, you get the idea. And we were really trying to decrease healthcare costs and healthcare obligations because corporations, most of the big ones, are self-insured. So every single heart attack, every single cancer that happens, high blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, hits their bottom line. So they had a vested interest to try to change things. Well, like I said, about 15 years in, I got a little burned out on that whole career path, and opportunities arose that allowed me to move from Boulder to Honolulu, Hawaii. And at the time, I was an Ironman distance triathlete. So I was out on the roads all the time, running and cycling. And so you get to see a city in a different way when you're running and biking and walking in a city. And I was just blown away by how hostile it was in Honolulu compared to Boulder. And so that got my mind sort of spinning a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute, it was so easy to train and be out, be, active, have an active lifestyle in Boulder compared to Honolulu, even though Honolulu had arguably better weather all year round. And so, yeah, that was like the light bulb was illuminated for me because I had been in the business of transforming corporate campuses, built environments, and making them more conducive to physical activity. And that was when the light bulb was illuminated for me that, hey, the way that we build our cities can have a profound impact on creating an environment for healthy, active lifestyles. So that was really the epiphany moment that got me thinking about that. Now, that's different than the question that you asked, because you asked when I started documenting, and that didn't come till much, much later. So, but the original epiphany was thinking about, oh, wow, our built environment. Then it took about a decade of me really diving into the health in the built environment and that connection, starting to network with experts in the field, Dr. Dick Jackson, and many, many others in the urbanism field. And then when was it? It was in 2011, I launched my nonprofit, Advocates for Healthy Communities. 2 years later, I released, or I should say, I really kicked off the Active Towns tour. And that's when Active Towns was born, was in 2013. And so that's when I started traveling around the country, primarily North America at the time, documenting what cities were doing to create an environment which encouraged healthy, active living. And then 5 years ago was when I really started leaning into the YouTube channel and the podcast and trying to broadcast out and tell these success stories, these towns that were making progress. And when I say towns, folks, I really do mean just any habitation, cities, communities, villages, towns. So it's synonymous with it. It just so happened that activetowns.org and activetowns.com were the URLs that were available. Active cities and active communities was already
Yeah.
taken.
What is a moment or story from your travels, since you've traveled a ton, that has changed how you think about community health or mobility?
I think one of the most profound stories that really kind of changed how I kind of look at this was a visit to the village of Houten in the Netherlands. Houten is a bedroom community, a very, very short train ride, about an 8-minute train ride or a 30-minute bike ride from the city of Utrecht. Utrecht is one of the most vibrant cities. The train station in Utrecht is actually the busiest in the nation because it is one of those central points for even international trains. But what was really fascinating about the visiting Houten was that this was a relatively new city. A new town is what they actually call them in Dutch. They call them new towns. And it was designed and conceived in the 70s and started building it out in the 1980s. But it was built out with the intention that there would be a motor vehicle circulation plan so that motor vehicles could only access parking and the houses from the periphery, not be able to drive straight through. So it was one of the first examples that I know of a community, a city that was really built intentionally from the ground up with a circulation plan where we didn't just give free rein to the automobile and say, okay, drive anywhere, have fun. It really was intentional about making it feasible, possible, and inviting for people to walk and cycle and use transit to be able to go about one's daily needs and not feel like, oh, I've got to get in the car. And even if you did, it's going to be more inconvenient because you got to have to drive all the way around. It's way more convenient to jump on the bike. So that profoundly changed my thought process of, oh, wow, we can build a new town, a new city, a new community based on this. Now, since then, subsequently, I've learned about other types of retrofits, like the city of Ghent in Belgium has done a circulation plan and just, implemented that. And then also Groningen up in the northern edges of the Netherlands. They have also done a circulation plan where motor vehicle drivers can't just drive right through the middle of the city. They get diverted off and have to go around. So anybody walking and biking or using a wheelchair can go right through the middle of the city, but you cannot drive that way. So that was a great story.
Austin, because I drive in Austin every single day, and I was talking to Rethink I-35 for one of my earlier episodes, and it was really insightful listening to what they had to say about the history and the barriers and what kind of effects it has caused to Austin. And my mom grew up here in Austin, and she talks about 4 I-35 and what it was like. And you spent a lot of time in Austin, correct?
Yeah.
What changes have you noticed throughout the time you spent here?
Yeah, so I literally spent 11 years there from November of basically late August or October of 2014 through November of just this past year, 2025. And what I really saw was a continuation of the streetscapes and the environment getting better and better and better. The story as to how we landed in Austin in the first place dates back to earlier in 2014 when I was delivering a keynote address at a conference on health and the built environment associated with the University of Texas at San Antonio, down in San Antonio. And everyone kept telling me, John, you've got to get to Austin to profile all the great culture of activity that's there. And so that gave me the opportunity to spend about 3 days there. I was able to meet up with a very dear friend of mine, Preston Tyree. Shout out, Preston. He's put me up for 3 days and we rode bikes all around the city. And so it really, I think, illuminated for me just the potential that the city had. And it's not to say that it isn't car centric. It is. Almost every city in North America is car centric. But what was there was you had some really good bones of there was this culture of activity where people did take time to integrate physical activity of all sorts into their daily lives. And it was just getting better and better and better. And so, what I saw in the period of time over those 11 years was just a wonderful addition to the all ages and abilities network, cycle network that was being placed, safer crossings for pedestrians, getting safer and safer in, more opportunity. The biggest problem that Austin has is that they, in the early years, mid years, I guess, of the history of the city, allowed it to sprawl out to 326 square miles. And so the vastness of the project is just, it's mind-boggling what it would take to actually be able to make the entire city safe for all ages and abilities to be able to walk and bike everywhere. But it's amazing how much has happened. When we first moved there in downtown, 3rd Street was the only protected bit of infrastructure. It was a protected bike lane with Dutch style red concrete. Yay for the
Yeah.
tinted red cycle track. And it was the only one at that point. By the time we left, there were hundreds of miles worth of protected and separated infrastructure. We lived right there in the Barton Springs, Zilker Park neighborhood area.
Yeah, it's
So
great over there.
yeah, fantastic. And it was wonderful to see Barton Springs Road go through a Vision Zero driven conversion and making it so much safer there. Again, some of the challenges with putting in infrastructure is there was an opportunity to do the same through Zilker Park, but that whole scenario that took place with some park related drama that took place meant that it was probably politically untenable to do those lane conversions through the park. But what they did do was they did actually install multi-use paths on sections of it. And there are additional plans for more multi-use plans or multi-use paths, grade separated when you're completely away from the actual road through the park. So that's a positive that did come out.
Yeah, I've only been in this area for 3 or 4 years, being in Austin a ton, and I've definitely already noticed a ton of differences. I see the red bike lanes everywhere. I
Mhm.
see it in East Austin. I see it up in Mueller. It's everywhere.
Can I
If
say
you,
one thing about
yeah,
Mueller, since you
yeah, I was
mentioned
about
it?
to ask. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's like my favorite. It's my favorite
Okay.
community there in the area because earlier you heard me talking about Houghton, a community that was built from the ground up. Well, guess what? The Mueller community was built from the ground up because that used to be our airport. And so this was an intentionally designed community that was, basically envisioned as a place where people could walk and bike to meet all their daily needs. And as such, due to a lot of the relationship with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, we were able to put on the ground a lot of bike lanes while the city or while the community was being built. So from the get-go, many of the kids who live in that neighborhood are able to actually ride in all ages and abilities facilities. And now with the opening of the Marshall Middle School there, they're able to actually ride their bike directly to school. How cool is that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a bike bus in Mueller, but I know there's a bike bus, I think, in more central Austin.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah, they were working on that. There certainly would be a great opportunity to do that. Since it is a middle school, it's got the catchment area for that particular school is greater. It goes beyond the boundaries of the actual Mueller community. And so even more advantageous for having like a bike bus. But they have had multiple bike to school events helping the kiddos get into that particular school.
I've participated a few years in a row in Bike to Work Day. And I know I've watched a few of your videos and you say, oh, it's bike to like every day I bike to work. Can you tell me about your experience with Bike to Work Day in Austin?
Yeah, I like to phrase it as bike anywhere
Yeah.
day, not just to work. And really, we have to understand what these are. These types of activities, engagement activities, whether they are bike buses or bike to work days. These are events, what I call in my terminology, a software activity asset. We have hardware activity asset, which is the built environment where we can put a pin in a map and say, hey, over here, we've got a protected bike lane. Over here, we've got a wonderful pool. Over there, we've got some parks. These are activity assets that are in the physical world. Well, the initiatives, the engagement activities, those are the software activity assets. And what I love about those types of things is it helps increase and enhance awareness of what is possible. And so the great thing about a bike to work day is trying to get some people who might just be bike commute curious and give them an opportunity to partner up with somebody who does it on a regular basis and, get out and do it. You've got the advantage of numbers. And so you've got lots and lots of people doing it at the same time. And so with numbers comes a little bit of enhanced safety. And it's just darn fun because there's like breakfast stops. And hey, who doesn't love breakfast tacos?
Oh yeah, we stopped by a few coffee shops and I'm like, ooh, cold brew. Ooh,
Yeah.
cold brew. Okay, too much cold brew at this point. I gotta make it to work.
Yeah. Which, by the
What?
way, which by
Yeah,
the way, just so you know too, from a behaviorist perspective, when I think about changing lifestyle behaviors and instilling habits, when we can make it fun, beautiful, and comfortable, it's much more likely that we get that positive hit in, endorphins in the brain that say, I want to do that tomorrow. And then the next day, and then the next day. And so that's one of the things that is so important about for cities to think about is when you're trying to create, get more people out of their cars and more people walking and biking to many meaningful destinations. If you make it truly beautiful, truly comfortable, truly inviting, then it has that abilities to start working on our behavior too, because it's enjoyable.
definitely. What effects does active mobility have on a person, not just physically, but also mentally?
Yeah, it's fascinating. The data is just so incredibly strong. Dr. John Rady wrote a book called Spark and looks at just what happens in the brain, especially in the hippocampus, when somebody is exercising and getting out and getting physical activity in. You get such a great hit of these, again, positive endorphins that are being released in the brain. And so, yes, you get a physiological response, which is good. You get a physiological response, not just in the brain, but also with your cardiovascular system. And you don't have to be working out. You don't have to be pushing hard to the point where you're sweating like crazy. You can just be getting some lighter, moderate activity in by getting around. So you get that positive benefit and just being able to reduce the cortisol levels, reduce the stress hormones that are going on. And it's just a tremendous amount of uplift in one's mood. And so nobody that I know of has ever gone out for, a walk or a bike ride, et cetera. And especially if it's in a beautiful location and it's comfortable, and then come back and say, I really wish I hadn't done that. That's
Yeah.
tremendous.
I went on a short run yesterday in South Austin around First Street. And
Yeah.
during my run, I was thinking, you're gonna find the most runners, the most bikers, the most people walking around in places that are built well and built around walkability and active transportation.
Yeah.
You're not going to find anybody running next to a frontage road, even if there's sidewalks, next to a road with 45-mile-per-hour speeds, even if there's bike lanes. I think of the trail around Lady Bird Lake. I think of Zilker Park. I think of all these really great bike lanes around Austin. And that's just one of those thoughts I had during my runs. Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, you've been afflicted by this. You can't even go for a run and not think about this
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, I mean, and speaking of like First Street, what a great example to try to transform a 4-lane street that has so many businesses along it and yet is basically treated as a traffic sewer. So there's so much opportunity and potential to convert that street into a much more welcoming environment. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, when you think about the bridges that we have, over the Ladybird Lake. Would you rather be on the multi-use path that's partnered with or paired with I-35, or would you rather be on the Pfluger Bridge? Well, you'd rather be on the Pfluger Bike
That
and Pedestrian
Pflugerville is
Bridge.
so great.
Yeah, the Pfluger Bridge is so much better. Why? Because you're not being pummeled by pollution, by noise, by exhaust, by brake dust, etc. It's an assault to your senses to be that close. Now, that being said, if that's the only opportunity you have to be able to put in a multi-use path and a safe facility in that particular area and be able to get people to meaningful destinations is alongside, let's say, 130 because there's one over there. It's like, yeah, that has to get built. And so, hat tip to CTMRA and some of the other state agencies that are putting in some of these multi-use paths along some of these major roadways and highways. We do need those too. But you never will see the numbers of utilization on a facility like that where you're literally being pummeled by the noise as you will on a facility like what you just mentioned, the Butler Hike and Bike Trail.
How unique is that trail? Is there anything comparable to in other cities? Like a 10-mile off-street trail where you can just get away from cars.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples, fortunately, around North
Okay.
America and around the world where these types of off-street networks of trails exist. And, Austin's probably standing on the shoulders of giants of other cities that have developed them as well. And what is rather unique is how in Austin, we almost have to have this whole public-private partnership thing to see those facilities be able to survive because on a per capita basis, the funding is so low for park facilities. And that includes linear parks like trails in the city of Austin. And so you see a situation where you've got the Trail Conservancy that is the stewards of that Butler Hike and Bike Trail, and they have their own fundraising and capital campaigns. They're working on the Wishbone Bridge. I'm not sure if it's done yet or ready to be open, but it
It
must be
should
soon.
later this month or early
Yeah,
February. Yeah.
absolutely amazing. I look forward to my return visit so I can document that. But a lot of that, is being stewarded by these nonprofits that have been there. Shoal Creek Conservancy, the same way of, stewarding the Shoal Creek path and the trail that is part of that. So that is a little bit unique. It's not completely, unheard of, but it is one of the things that the city of Austin, the community of Austin has gotten behind these organizations, the Red Line Parkway with Tom Wald working on that to try to say, hey, we're going to like rally the community to enhance the support for this because the funding just isn't being budgeted by the city to really take it to the level that we want to see these facilities at. So it's been creative.
Yeah. You bring up a ton of organizations that I've heard of and some communities that are local to Austin. How did you get connected with these nonprofits?
Really, as a content creator and
Okay.
coming into the space, I have the benefit of being perceived as being somebody who's operating in this area. I always hesitate from saying the word expert, but I'm one of a handful of people who are actively doing this kind of work at that intersection of health and the built environment and what needs to be done. And so it didn't take long for me to get connected with all of the characters and all the wonderful organizations and Austin Outside and Ted Siff and all of those guys that are doing that. And that's a great example too, the Austin Outside, because that's an umbrella organization with a whole bunch of organizations underneath it that have been, doing great, great work. It's easy when you launch a podcast because then you can put an invite out to folks and say, hey, come on to the podcast and talk about your program. You had the Rethink 35 folks on. I've had them on 3 or 4 times. It's wonderful to be able to have a platform when you're able to broadcast out the success stories and the little successes that are happening, and then also the challenges and what we need to do to make our communities better.
It's definitely interesting. The more I look into communities and all of these nonprofits, I'm like, oh my gosh, they exist there. They exist there. That's so
Yeah.
cool. I interviewed the local Strong Towns conversation in Pflugerville. I'm like, oh my gosh, Pflugerville. Stroads all over the place.
Yeah.
Everyone drives, of course. But there's people there trying
Yeah.
to make it better to live in. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it really is. And Strong Towns is an organization I'm very closely affiliated with. We gave the story about how I settled on the name Strong Towns because, or excuse me, Active Towns because the URLs were available. Well, the very next thing that I did was reach out to my friend Chuck Marone and say, hey, just so you know, I'm planning on naming my next initiative Active Towns. Are you okay with that? And he's like, heck yeah, go for it. And he talks about the fact, and he and I, have been on each other's podcast multiple times over the past decade plus. And, we talk about the fact that you cannot be a strong town unless you're also an active town. And you're not going to be an active town unless you're also a strong town. And so they really work. They're, simpatico and they go hand in hand.
Yeah. I haven't really developed, I guess, my mission statement yet. I want it to be cities in motion, okay? So cities that are like progressing towards after transportation, but that also includes this, where it's people are free to move about how they want to. It's really cool getting to talk to all these people and all of those organizations that you brought up. I've
Yeah.
already DM'd a few or emailed a few, and I'm gonna have them on very soon. So
I
looking
love
forward
that.
to
I love
that.
it. Well, and I love double entendres, and you just kind of alluded to that,
Yeah.
and that's a big part of what I think of when I think of active towns. I'm not only thinking, active meaning we are more physically active and we actually get, we're moving around, under our own power, but I also recognize that active towns are also more civically engaged because of what we were talking about earlier is you see a city in a much different way when you're walking and biking in a city, and so you're much more likely to speak up and get engaged and get involved within your communities. Even my nonprofit, which is Advocates for Healthy Communities, the healthy there again is not just your physical health and your mental health and all that, but also healthy from a fiscal standpoint, so it's fiscally healthy as well. It is a successful community. So I love those double entendres.
Yeah. It wasn't on purpose, but it's
Yeah.
it's happening, it's developing, and I like it. What role do stories in media, like your podcast and YouTube channel, play in actually shifting how people think about street design and community health?
I think it has everything to do with enhancing awareness and creating momentum. We can throw stats and data at people all we want, but it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't resonate with them at some level that's personal. And so what I try to do is tell the positive success stories so that people can say, "Oh my gosh, look what's happening in Bentonville, Arkansas," or look what's happening over in this community across the ocean. Wow, this really is possible. This isn't just some sort of pipe dream. And so I like to think about this as, creating positive stories that can create that inspiration and get people engaged so that they can, try to advocate within their own neighborhoods, within their own communities, something better, a more livable community, a higher quality of life for everyone, whether you walk, whether you drive, whether you do a combination, whether you're on a bike, etc. It shouldn't matter. You should be able to feel like your community is meeting your needs and helping you do that through mobility and transportation and being able to get to your meaningful destinations, which might include a whole variety of different activity assets.
I guess speaking of positivity, like every single YouTube video and podcast episode that I've listened to of yours has
Mhm.
been super positive. I have not heard you say a negative thing. There are other communities in the urbanism space where it's just like blah blah blah. I'm so angry at this and this and this is the worst thing ever. But it feels so nice to listen to your podcast or watch your YouTube videos. So thank you for creating that space.
Yeah, I shock some of my regular viewers every once in a while when I'm in a particular ornery mood. There's one Dutch video that my Dutch audience really took exception because I was riding down, from one city to another. I was riding from Breda to Tilburg, and I was just like, I can't believe they didn't do this better. And, all my regular viewers were, John, you must have been in a really ornery mood. You were so negative. And I was just like, well, I have high expectations for the Dutch. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do try to tell the positive success stories. That's not to mean that everything is like all roses and wonderful.
Yes,
You
of
know, I
course.
did have Adam Greenfield on. I did have Miriam on. You know, we talked about the scar that is I-35 and the segregation legacy that is running an interstate highway through the middle of a city. And so we have these tough conversations, but at the same time, I always try to bring it back around to, something that we feel empowered that we can do. So we get inspired to, do the work and, and feel like it is possible.
If a town asked you for one piece of advice to get started on becoming more active or people centered, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to answer this in two different ways. I'm
Okay.
going to answer it in the sense as if the actual town is asking me, the city council and the city leaders are asking, and I'm going to say, hey, you need to listen to your community. You need to really figure out what's going wrong and what is missing from, them feeling like this is a safe and welcoming environment for all ages and all abilities. And by the way, I can point out to them that, if the number of kids walking and biking to school and to the meaningful destinations is in single digits, then you've got a problem. You need to be able to create a more inviting environment for literally all ages and abilities. Somebody should be able to feel like they can get to their meaningful destinations after they've aged out and can no longer drive. They should be able to walk to meaningful destinations, be able to bike, especially with the assistance from an electric assist bicycle, all the better. So that would be my number one thing. And associated with that, I know that one of the things that they're going to hear from their constituents is we need safer streets, we need slower speeds, we need to change the dynamics so that our streets are no longer traffic sewers. They really are streets that are for people. My tagline, streets are for people. There's a reason I have that as a tagline, is that we can do so much by just slowing motor vehicle traffic down. The second way I'm going to answer that question is when the town or the advocates and the community members asking me, John, what can we do? And I say, you have to start talking to your neighbors. You have to start having these conversations about your vision of doing that. And the reason why I say that is we have to grow the tent. The whole reason why Austin Outside as an umbrella organization is so successful and Ted Siff has been so successful over the past 4 to 5 decades in raising, I think he had mentioned it was nearly $2 billion worth of bond funding, for parks and trails and pathways and bike lanes over that period of time is because of the networking, getting people engaged and involved. So when people, go to really moaning and groaning and complaining about what cities aren't doing and they need to do more, I come push back and say, well, then you need to do more about just talking, having these conversations with your fellow members, community members, and residents, because ultimately when the changes start happening, when you do start putting in like a protected bike lane, the haters are going to come out. And the only way that the leaders, city leaders, the politicians and the senior staff within a city can push through that resistance is if they feel like the community has their back. They can have a correct assessment that, the vast majority of these people who are belly aching and complaining right now are doing so because change is difficult, change is hard. And so we need to, we've evaluated this. This is the right thing to do, and we need to stick to it. So, in other words, that combination of the politicians and the city leaders listening to the community, and then the community gathering and coming together in en masse to be able to say, this is what our vision is. We really want this. We want safer streets. We want safer communities so that we can walk and bike and use public transit.
I want to start asking this to my guests at the end of each episode. What is a book you read recently that you would recommend and why?
Oh my gosh. You asked a guy who interviews authors. You've got 4 books here.
Okay.
Recent books that just came out. So I have to give a shout out for my good friends, Chris and Melissa. Women Changing Cities, The Global Stories of Urban
Yeah.
Transformations. They're going to be in
You
town.
had that ready?
I had that ready.
Okay.
It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful book. You've got to pick it up. Chris has a lot of photography in this
Yeah.
book. Chris and Melissa will be there in Austin in a couple days, a couple weeks, etc. You also have to read Killed by a Traffic Engineer by Wes Marshall. I had Wes on for a live streaming event when he released this book. I'm actually listening to it a second time right now on Audible. It's unfortunately not his voice, but it's still very, very well done. And it's just so many great stories in there and really, really short chapters. So even though it's a very provocative title, it's a really, really good book. And what's great about it is since he is a traffic engineer, even though it says killed by a traffic engineer, he's writing it from the perspective of, hey, this is how I was trained and it was wrong. And here's why it was wrong. Mm-hmm. And the things that you're being told are not true. The third one, Life After Cars. Got to get this. Sarah and Doug were just in Austin recently and they killed it. They had wonderful things to say about Austin. And then the fourth and final book is a book that I'm going to be interviewing Carter later this week. If you want to win, you've got to fight. And this is actually a playbook or a blueprint on what to do and how to go about organizing. And it's fantastic because it really is a guide to effective transportation advocacy. So if you want to win, you've got to fight by Carter Lavin.
Could you quickly tell us where people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. activetowns.org is the website. You can pop in over there, but really the best place to find me is on YouTube, the Active Towns YouTube channel. Pop on in, pace yourself, folks. There's like 600 or so videos out there, 324 podcast episodes. I find the Active Towns podcast out on all the major podcasting platforms. So wherever you listen to your fine podcasts, you should be able to find the Active Towns podcast, creating or conversations about creating a culture of activity. So YouTube and out in the podcast world.
Thanks so much to John Simmerman for taking the time to join me today. His work does such a great job connecting the dots between health, mobility, and the everyday experience of living in a place. And I really appreciate the perspective he brings to these conversations. I highly recommend checking out Active Towns, whether that's the podcast, the YouTube channel, or John's writing. There's a ton of great storytelling and practical insight into what people-centered communities can look like. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps more people find the show. You can find links to John's work along with the book recommendation from today's conversation in the show notes. Thanks for listening. And until next time, keep your cities in motion.